In the recent G20 summit in India, the US and EU take the opportunity to announce their plan to build an economic corner linking Europe with the Middle East, Israel and India via railway and sea. This is a project that US President Biden described it as a really big deal and maybe a game-changing investment. According to them, trade between India, Middle East and Europe will be much more faster and cheaper by maybe at least 40%. The project is called Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, and everyone knows that it is just a plan by the West to counter China Belt and Road project to enhance the US dollar and euro dollar reserve currency in the world, as most of this trade will most likely be settled in the US dollar and euro dollar since it is a project that is planned and controlled by the West. The American may have realized that imposing sanctions on China's semiconductor and launching an economic war against China may not be enough to prevent the rise of China. And they are now going to up the game by coming up with a plan to counter China Belt and Road project and to prevent China yuan from dominating the world trade in the future. This is because if most of the global trade is dominated by China, sooner or later, most of this global trade may be settled in China yuan and US dollar may be dethroned and no longer the world reserve currency. Now the funny thing over here is that unlike China, who enjoy massive trade surplus with the rest of the world and have the extra money to pump into her Belt and Road projects, the West, EU and US are now heavily in debts. Europe is suffering from a high bill energy crisis and high inflation, and for the American, their budget deficit is expected to hit around $2 trillion this year. So the question over here is that who is going to pay for this plan? Most likely, the American will be the one that will pick up the bill, as technically as the world reserve currency, the American can borrow money easily in the international market. But we need to understand that this action or this project will add on to the US massive debt problem. Interest rate on US bond is now at a higher side. American taxpayer will need to pay for all this sooner or later. Everyone know how crazy the US debt problem is. Total debt is more than $32 trillion and yearly budget deficit now often hit more than $1 trillion. We do not need a rocket scientist to tell us that all these debts are simply unsustainable. Moreover, every year the US will also need to raise more debts to roll over their old debts that matured. And with more debts means more money supply in the market. More money supply means higher inflation for the US and the world. Then, Federal Reserve may be trapped where they need to keep interest rate on the higher side for a long period of time. So what will happen next? My personal view is that this action may result in the American getting the opposite result which they hope for. Why do I say so? By keeping interest rate on the higher side to fight inflation, Federal Reserve will result in a stronger US dollar. If nations worldwide continue to use US dollar in their international trade, they are going to come out with more of their local currency to buy the same amount of US dollar to pay for the import. That means higher inflation for them. So the best solution for nations worldwide is to speed up their de-dollarization movement and use their local currency for most international trade to escape the negative effect of using the US dollar. So the economic corner linking EU with the Middle East, India via railway and sea that is led by the American may speed out the global de-dollarization instead of helping it, just like how the sanction of China Tech and China Huawei backfire, and that kind of motivate China and Huawei to innovate, and now they are able to make advanced microchip without using much US technology. What I mean is that the new Huawei Mix 60 smartphone have almost no American technology in it, and the speed is as fast as 5G mobile technology. The chip is 7 nanometer made by Huawei with no American technology. The West initially estimated that China may need at least 10 to 20 years to be able to make 7 nanometer chip, and the Americans are surprised that China managed to do it within this 4 years instead. And the end result is that not only the Western semiconductor company lose order from China when they cannot sell to China, now this Western semiconductor company may need to also compete with China advanced microchip on the international market once China start to export her advanced chip in the future. Most likely, China advanced chip will be sold at a lower price than the West. So you see, the American policymaker often may make policy that may result in negative outcome for the American in the international market. Moreover, since China is technically the world factory and most consumer product and service are made in China, without China involvement, the economic corner that link Europe with the Middle East and India may not be successful. This is because China products and goods will use China Belt and Route for their India, Middle East and EU businesses and trade and transaction. Hence, transaction in the American economic corner that link Europe with the Middle East and India may be lower than China Belt and Road program, since most global trade today involve China products and service. I don't see why China company will want to support the American instead of supporting their own Belt and Road. Moreover, since Saudi Arabia Crown Prince does not really have a close relationship with Biden, he may be tempted to kick negotiation for this project after the 2024 US president election, so to potentially clinch a better deal with a Republican president. And Jordan, a key central node in this new corridor, had remained silent. This is to avoid an internal backlash of doing business with Israel, who is involved in the new corridor program. Moreover, this program may need to do more to convince businesses and trade to switch over from China Belt and Road program, which is already in place for around 10 years. Which is now more stable, and China have poured hundreds of billion dollars running it. Are the American and EU going to match what China has spent by using hundreds of billion dollars to actually fund this economic corridor? To actually kickstart? I doubt so. As I mentioned earlier on, they are already heavily in debts. And India and this Middle East nation also may not want to come out with the money for this economic corridor, since they have the existing China Belt and Road program to use. Why should they pay for an alternative route just to help the American to fight off China global influence? All this above may further complicate the American-led economic corridor. It may never take off and may not be successful. Moreover, recent reports have indicated that China may plan to introduce Belt and Road 2.0 and may allocate a few more trillion dollars to it, and the American may fight hard to compete with China, as with more investment money, China may be able to gain further influence in Middle East and the rest of the world. So the American economic corridor may not be enough to challenge China Belt and Road unless the American is prepared to spend more money on it out of her own pocket. And there's another important issue that the American may have overlooked, as Turkey and Egypt will be left out of the American economic corridor route. They are not very happy with it, as their economy will be affected if the American economic corridor bypass them. And if American go ahead with the economic corridor, it may offer China and Russia an opportunity to move closer with Turkey and Egypt, as Turkey and Egypt may be very angry with the American for doing that, and they may choose to work closer with China and Russia in the future. I mean, this is something which the American do not want to see. Egypt, after all, control the Suez Canal, and Turkey control the entrance to Black Sea, which is now important for Ukraine, whom is now supported by the West in a war against Russia. This is because Ukraine export need to bypass Turkey control Black Sea entrance. And if this issue is not handled well by the American, instead of strengthening American influence in the Middle East, this economic corridor may weaken American influence in the Middle East in the long run. So what is your view on this American-led economic corridor that involves India, Israel, Middle East and EU? Do you think it will be successful? Please comment below and share with me. Please subscribe, share and like. Thanks for watching.